What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? How many awards is Ketel Marte going to take home this offseason? And looking at some more free agent targets for the Dbacks this free agency.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist, and I'm a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we are going to be discussing Ketel Marte nominated for a Silver Slugger award, some more free agent options for the D-backs, and then ending the podcast with a little Paul Sewald player review. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. Would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the podcast and let's discuss Ketel Marte because it was announced. All the Silver Slugger finalists were announced, and in the National League, unfortunately, there was only one D-back nominated, and that was Ketel Marte. Now, I will say, looking at like the first base position, it was loaded. Pete Alonso, Freddie Freeman, Bryce Harper. But if we're being honest, if Christian Walker does not get hurt, Christian Walker is a finalist for the Silver Slugger award because I think we all believe Christian Walker definitely had a better season than a guy like Pete Alonso. And it's interesting to see. I think one of the biggest points to watch this offseason is the Christian Walker market versus the Pete Alonso market, because I think the numbers and the metrics would actually tell you Christian Walker is better, but because Pete Alonso hit 53 home runs as a rookie and is perennially around 40 home runs, I think he's going to get a bigger contract. I think he's a bigger name, but if you're being honest, over the last 3 years, like who's a better player per game, overall production, defense, taking everything into account, it's super close. You could say Pete over Christian Walker, but I think it's definitely close between those two guys. And so I'm very curious to see the market between those two players this offseason to see who gets more money. But if we're talking about the Silver Slugger award for this year, Christian Walker definitely had a better season than Pete Alonso. And if he played 162 games, Christian Walker would have destroyed Pete Alonso's numbers, I believe. And even looking at the other first baseman, I mean, Bryce Harper had himself a very strong season as well, but I think it also would have been pretty close between him and Christian Walker for the Silver Slugger award. So that injury for Christian Walker, honestly, probably costed him even some potential money, because maybe he is a Silver Slugger finalist, maybe even wins the Silver Slugger. Like, just the more accolades you can rack up in your contract year right before you hit free agency, it's only going to help you. And then looking at like third base, like, to be honest, why is Eugenio Suarez not considered a Silver Slugger finalist? Like, Alec Bohm? Did Alec Bohm have a better season than Eugenio? I know he hits a ton of doubles, but Eugenio had double the amount of home runs, more RBIs, and I think they had like the same OPS as well. He might have had like Bohm might have had like 1 point higher than Eugenio Suarez. You look at a Matt Chapman, like across the board, the numbers were comparable, if not worse, to Eugenio's, and the same with Manny Machado, who Machado might be living off of the name value a little bit because his OPS was, again, like the same as Eugenio's, less home runs than Eugenio. Like, I know Eugenio had a very bad first half of the season, but if you're Babe Ruth in the second half of the year, maybe you should be considered for a Silver Slugger. And I don't know if any of the outfielders should be considered. Probably not giving it to Jake McCarthy or Corbin Carroll or Lourdes Gurriel. DH, I think, it would have been fun with a Jock Peterson, but Shohei Ohtani and Marcell Ozuna definitely had that locked down. But if you had to pick guys from the D-backs that were worthy of consideration, I think it starts with Christian Walker and Eugenio Suarez. But Ketel Marte, also named Silver Slugger. And when you look at him versus competition, like Ketel Marte is back to being the best second baseman in the sport because it's him versus Luis Garcia, who had a breakout season on the Nationals, I'll give him, and against Jonathan India of the Reds. And both of those guys are good. I'm not going to discredit or disparage them in any way, but are they Ketel Marte, who just had himself a fantastic year, had himself maybe a career year, maybe the best season of his career? Like, they're not as good as the Ketel Marte that we just saw that at one point on FanDuel was considered maybe second in MVP voting, and not just maybe considered second. Like, he was running away with a runner-up in MVP voting behind Shohei Ohtani right before he got hurt. So Marte had himself an incredible year, and Garcia, very strong season. You compare his 24-year-old campaign to what he was doing previously, and it's like, yes, this is a major improvement, a major step up. But for this award, the Silver Slugger Award, like, Luis Garcia should not even be a finalist. Like, the position at second base, the National League was incredibly weak this year. If your 3 Silver Slugger Award finalists are Ketel Marte, who should be an MVP finalist, and then it's Luis Garcia, who finally proved to be just a good Major League Baseball player this year. I mean, 18 home runs, 22 stolen bases, 140 games, a 762 OPS, like a very good season for Luis Garcia, but was it good enough to win the Silver Slugger Award? Then Jonathan India, maybe the quietest Rookie of the Year winner ever, like won in 2021 for the Cincinnati Reds. And it's like, we never really had a conversation about India since then because he kind of peaked as a rookie. And if he had his rookie season this year, it would probably be a little bit more of an argument and more competition against Ketel Marte for the Silver Slugger Award. But right now, India, a 15 home run guy, a 750 OPS, a 248 average, 58 RBIs, like just the traditional numbers that would tell you whether this guy is deserving of the Silver Slugger Award or not. His numbers do not compare to Ketel Marte, and Marte is going to run away with this award. So we should already give him the credit. The real question is, how many awards is Ketel Marte going to win this offseason? Because he's got this one in the bag. He unfortunately didn't win the Gold Glove, got second place there. I think he's going to be named to the All MLB First Team. And then will he be named a finalist for the MVP award as well? He should be, but it's going to be the offseason of Marte with all these awards coming down the pipe. Now I want to discuss some more free agent targets for the D-backs in segment number 2. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel's America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. For all the Arizona Cardinals fans out there, FanDuel has this feature called the Same Game Parlay. You could parlay Cardinals money line where Kyler Murray over on total rushing yards and over on passing yards. And if that 3-leg hits, I promise you'll get a big smile on your face. So get started today on FanDuel.com. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first win of $5 hits. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Let's discuss not Ketel Marte. Let's discuss some more free agent options for the D-backs. We did a part 1 last week where we just discussed some guys who I think are tier 1 free agent targets at least in terms of the D-backs needs and what they are willing to spend. Because if you're just talking about tier one free agents overall, it's the Juan Sotos, it's the Corbin Burns, right? But I don't think those are realistic targets for Arizona. Juan Soto would be incredible in a D-backs uniform, but the D-backs are not going to bid $600 million or whatever it takes to get him. As cool as it would be to get Corbin Burns, the D-backs are probably not going to shell out the money for him. But I did lay out some tier one free agent targets, the best of the guys that the D-backs can afford, and I think that are attainable. I talked about Walker Buehler and like a Blake Snell last week on the podcast. And today I have a few more guys that I want to discuss. These are D-backs tier one targets, or at least guys who I think are really good. That could be a little expensive, but I do think could help out Arizona a lot. The first name is Sean Manaea, who I was very skeptical on all season long, but he proved to be really good. And what was most impressive was what he did in the postseason, because he definitely surprised me at times in the playoffs. Was he good against the Dodgers this past year in the playoffs? No, because they're the LA Dodgers. That's okay. But incredible against Philadelphia, really strong in the wild card series as well against Milwaukee. I thought he had a really good postseason. I thought he had a really good regular season, kind of a workhorse, 181 innings pitch, good strikeout numbers. Like the whip is good, doesn't give up a ton of contact, had a pretty low ERA this past season. He kind of reworked himself as a pitcher, because when he broke into the league, he was a sinker ball pitcher. That was his go-to pitch. You look back in 2019, what made him most effective in Oakland when he was putting up ERAs in the low threes, and we were really excited about this up-and-coming pitcher for the Oakland A's. That's when he was throwing his sinker ball as his primary pitch. Then the next couple of seasons, he still uses sinker ball as his primary pitch, but it got shelled. And then the next couple seasons after that, he kind of went away from it. That's 2022, 2023. He became four-seam fastball dominant, and he really struggled. And we saw the ERA and the numbers balloon for him. But this year, he went back to sinker first, sweeper second, was really good against left-handed batters, and had a fantastic season for the New York Mets at 6'5", 245 pounds. I would be interested in Sean Manaea as a back-end starter for this D-backs team, as a potential number 4 starter, filling out this rotation. But that's only if you could get off the Erod and Monty stuff. Like a lot of this stuff, when we talk about starters that can help with the D-backs rotation, like I would love to add these D-backs. I would love to add these targets to this D-backs team. The only issue is it might get tough when you're talking about money and the fact that this D-backs rotation is already filled. You would probably have to, if you were to sign these guys, then you would probably have to trade like Monty right after, or potentially trade Monty before even signing one of these dudes. So these are all targets of speculation, but I do think these guys could fit in a D-backs uniform and would definitely help out this organization. Next up is a guy who's a little bit more risky, but I don't mind risk. When you already have a rotation of Gallen, Kelly, Fott, you still got Erod and Monty. Obviously, I want to kick out one of Erod or Monty, but you're going to have 4 starters already locked in already. That's why I don't mind a little risk with this next guy, because if he hits, he has tremendous upside. The only issue is I just don't know how healthy he's going to be, and this might be more of a second half for next year, potentially of a 2026 piece if you could sign him to a multi-year deal for the cheap, because Shane Bieber is someone that I just have been infatuated with throughout his career. Going back to 2020, where he won the Cy Young in the COVID-shortened season, I think he's been one of the best pitchers in Major League Baseball. You look at what he did in 2022, a complete workhorse, sub-3 ERA, 200 innings pitch. He's always had great strikeout numbers throughout his career, always had very good command, and like he's not a guy that gives up a ton of home runs. And his issue is he's just dealt with so many injuries throughout his career. You look at 2021, 16 starts, 2023, 21 starts, and then basically missed the entirety of this season. And I'm not too sure how healthy he is. Let's actually check in on it right now. But regardless, like I do think he could be an interesting guy, whether he's ready for the start of next season or not, whether he's a guy that's like more like Robbie Ray, where you're kind of hoping maybe around the summertime he starts to come back, and it's like hopefully your team's already good, hopefully you're already thriving as an organization, and they could just plop him into a mix of good vibes already that could only elevate what we already have going on. That's kind of like that would be the perfect move. I would love to add Shane Bieber into the rotation for the D-backs. I don't think he would be too expensive right now, considering he's coming off Tommy John surgery. But he is a stud pitcher when he's right, and I think he would be a very intriguing and interesting add for the D-backs. High risk, but of course, a lot of upside and reward if Shane Bieber hits. This next guy could potentially be expensive among the relievers because when you looked at the trade deadline this past year, he was probably the most expensive guy. Tanner Scott had himself a fantastic season, 1.75 ERA, and he's been fantastic the last 2 years. Walk rate, always going to be a problem with Tanner Scott. 4.5 walks per nine this past year. He's been like a 6 guy in 2022 and 2021, but also a guy, 12 strikeouts per 9 innings in his career. So yes, he walks a lot, but also strikes out a ton, and he's not giving up home runs, right? He's not, at least not doing the third of the 3 true outcomes. He's striking out, he's giving up walks, but he's not giving up home runs. ERA super low. This is a dominant pitcher over the last couple of years. And if you brought him in with like a Justin Martinez and what the Kevin Ginkles can do and the AJ Pucks, like we're just trying to rebuild the Miami Marlins bullpen basically with Puck and Tanner Scott, because those two guys were nasty for the Marlins. And Tanner Scott, what he was able to do in the postseason, struck out Ohtani, I think 4 times in the playoffs. Fastball averages 97 miles per hour. Like Tanner Scott is a really, really good reliever, and he could be a little expensive because the reliever market always feels like it can get a little expensive because those guys are such hot commodities. But if Arizona can add a guy like Scott into the current bullpen, this D-backs bullpen could be nasty potentially, and it's not something that we ever say about this D-backs bullpen. But if you have Martinez, Puck, Scott, Ginkle, Mantiply, we'll see where Bryce Jarvis is. Like, I'm definitely forgetting a guy or two. Maybe there's someone else internally, like Gilbert Diaz, like a step up. But D-backs definitely could build themselves a good bullpen if they were able to add a guy like Tanner Scott into the mix. And speaking of the D-backs bullpen, I want to talk about Paul Sewald and the 2024 season he just had with Arizona in segment number 3. But hey, I need to talk to you guys, my dudes out there, about their sexual health, because your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have the time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through HIMS, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. HIMS provides access to a range of doctors' trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. And prescribed your medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. Start your free online visit at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compound products, which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss Paul Sewald and the season he just had with Arizona, because Paul Sewald is a pending free agent right now, and I don't know if the vibes are there for the D-backs to bring Paul Sewald back to Arizona? It is a good question. And if I had to do a little meter or percentage of the D-backs bringing back Paul Sewald, I would probably say it's below 50%. I'll probably say like 65-35. Paul Sewald does not come back to the Arizona Diamondbacks next season. And I think a lot of D-backs fans would be very happy with that decision because I think they were very frustrated with Paul Sewald in 2024. And I think some fans blame Paul Sewald for, missing the postseason. Maybe not a large percentage of the blame pie, but definitely a small percentage because he definitely had a streak in the middle of the summer where he was giving up blown save after blown save. And if the D-backs just convert one of those games, they are in the postseason this year. And who knows what happens? But unfortunately, that did not happen. Dodgers are World Series champions, and I don't want to talk about it any further than that. But Paul Sewald, when looking at his 2024 season, it's not as bad as what we remember. It finished bad, and it in the middle, it got horrendous because, again, he was a major reason and a part of the reason why the D-backs missed out on the playoffs this year, but he wasn't the whole reason. But when looking at his season, it was definitely a tale of two halves because I think we forget Paul Sewald started this season dominant. He had 18 outings where he finished with an ERA of .54. Through his first 18 outings, he had a sub-1 ERA. He had no blown saves. This was a guy who only allowed one earned run, and it was in his debut outing. From May 7th to June 30th, he allowed one earned run, and that was in his debut outing. He was dominant for the D-backs through his first 18 outings. 11 saves during that time. He looked incredible. We felt like Paul Sewald was the answer to all our problems because if you remember, with him out, we didn't know what to do with Kevin Ginkel. He was struggling as a closer. Thankfully, Justin Martinez was able to help us out at times, but we were struggling to close out games. And then Paul Sewald comes back and is immediately dominant for Arizona, goes on a run, a stretch where he's just shutting the door night after night for the D-backs. And we feel so good about him as his closer. And then July 2nd against the LA Dodgers, he blows a save, but it's okay, it's the Dodgers. It's the Dodgers, guys. Let's give him a little grace. He's been fantastic. And then July 5th, he does against the Padres. I'm listen, I know it's been back-to-back outings, but guys, can we remember? He had 18 straight outings where he looked dominant. He was 11-0. Hit a .54 ERA. I know his ERA basically doubled after two bad outings, but he was so good for the whole season. Can we give him a little bit of grace? Then he did it a third time, and it was okay. I think we actually have to do something about Paul Sewald here. And ever since then, he just kind of went up and down for the rest of the season where he just had these spells where he was just really struggling. We had to remove him as the closer, and we had to try out Justin Martinez, who was able to be a saving grace for the D-backs. And Paul Sewald, when looking at his season, it was an incredible first 18 outings. And then after that, it was a lot of shakiness. And he was a big reason why the D-backs, not the whole reason, but a big reason why the D-backs missed out on the playoffs. But it wasn't all bad for Paul Sewald this past year. Against right-handed batters, he was very good. Sub 200 batting average against righties, 627 OPS against righties. At home this year for the D-backs, he was really good. A 305 ERA, a 141 average allowed, in front of his home fans of Arizona. Playing for the D-backs, he was incredible. Again, in the first half of the season, a 3.38 ERA, but he was better than that because that's including a couple of those blown saves he had. A 171 average allowed in the first half of the season, including those blown saves. That's how good he was those first 18 outings. And even with that, all that being said, all those moments where he was good in the first half and he still had a pretty solid K rate and the walk rate wasn't too bad. There are things that are still positive from Paul Sewald from this past year, but for the most part, he definitely struggled. He was really bad in save situations for the D-backs. He was horrendous against left-handed bats this past year. 861 OPS against lefties. And for Paul Sewald, like I said, I think the odds of him coming back to the D-backs are super low. But if he was to return to Arizona, it could not be in a closing role. It cannot be. He cannot be a closer. For Paul Sewald to return, because I'm actually not against the idea of Sewald returning, but it has to be in the role of you're coming back to be right-handed Joe man play, which means you're a specialist. You're only against right-handed bats and maybe only against right-handed bats in mid to low leverage situations. Like you're not coming in the ninth inning. You're probably not coming in the eighth inning either. But seventh inning, we need to get a couple big righties out. Yes, we could bring you in. Your strikeout numbers were great against righties. They struggled to hit against you all season long. Like there are still aspects of Paul Sewald's game that still are good in quality and still make him useful. The problem is we tried to make him our closer, and he cannot be that because if you have power hitting lefties, he still likes to throw meatballs upper middle of the zone, and guys like Ohtani just crush it. And so for Sewald, make him the righty version of Joe Mantiply as a specialist that comes in. Maybe it's only at home because that's where he plays the best, but he has to be a specialist going forward. No more closing games for Paul Sewald if he was to return to the D-backs in 2025. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.